Hello and welcome back to another interview with Yoshi P at Gamescom 2024. This is one that I didn't see until I did a bit of a search around. This is on a page called Crystal Universe. It seems like quite an interesting news place for gaming, and they do a lot of Final Fantasy XIV stuff. So let's have a look at this. This is an interview then with Yoshi P at Gamescom 2024, and there's some interesting questions and some equally interesting answers. So as you can see here, there'll be a link in the description to this post. Go give it some love, go give it at least a view. And yeah, so basically this talks about the storyline and features that might come in the future. So the first question was, the saga of Hydaelyn and Zodiac spanned the base game, the 4 expansions, and finally ended with Endwalker. Can we expect a new story that spans several expansions? And if so, is it already clear how many expansions will cover the new story? Yoshi P says, for example, when I think back to the story of Hydaelyn and Zodiac, I always had different routes in my head as to how the story would develop. How we ultimately got to a certain destination was usually more of an improvisation than a fixed plan. With regard to the new story, which starts with a new key item, players who have completed the previous story of Dawntrail will certainly already have some idea or guess as to where our journey will take us. But I can't see at this point how long the new story will be, or how many expansions it will span. Our biggest priority right now is to advance the story with the upcoming patches. We want to make the element of surprise and excitement tangible for the players, while we as a development team shape the continuing story and slowly but surely see a path where the journey will take us. We attach great importance to the feedback from the community and will use it to create a story that everyone will enjoy, end quote. So, it would appear like the end of the expansion, the post-credit scene, if you remember that, with that certain item, is obviously a bigger deal than a lot of people probably put thought into it. And there's a lot of speculation as to what that is. And obviously Yoshi P is talking about keeping the audience guessing and to sort of evaluate those responses, that feedback, and then create a storyline based on that. So it looks like it's not set in stone. Maybe it has like guidelines for how they want to do it. But yeah, I think a lot of the time with the Hydaelyn and Zodiac stuff, in previous interviews, we saw how they did plan the basic, plot points in advance. But they pretty much did the same thing. Things either got bigger or shorter depending on what they wanted to do with a specific expansion and which direction they wanted to take it. So there's also other constraints. So it's interesting to see that that confirmation of feedback being important to what they do with the characters and where they go. Good question. Second question. Speaking of the future of Final Fantasy XIV with the Ascians and Xenos, we have defeated 2 strong antagonists who took a lot from us. Will there be a similarly iconic enemies in the new story? Yoshi P says, of course, but it takes time to develop such an antagonist. Although the Ascians have always existed, they only really appeared at the end of 2.0. Likewise, at the end of patch 3.0, when the focus there was on the war between humans and dragons, and then Xenos appeared in patch 4.0. In view of this development, we'll try to create such connections in the future and build a new enemy in this way. So it won't be the case that in the next expansion an antagonist suddenly appears who says, I am the strongest, and then becomes the enemy, quotations, end quote. Yeah, I honestly think that the pacing is important around the development of a villain. I think a lot of people either love or hate Xenos for many reasons, but one of the things, at least, that was kind of prevalent is that they made that character a reoccurring theme. One piece of feedback I would have with that character, being not one of my favorite personally, is that it would have been nice if they had a little bit more of the Ascian treatment, of more of show, don't tell, but also don't really interact with them as much. I personally love it when there's a character that's alluded to and then you don't really get to confront them at all, and it builds up to that, and it's just like this long drawn out process of this is a bad guy, like the Ascians. For the longest time, a lot of people were like, these must be the worst people on the planet. Who are these people? And you kept guessing until eventually that reveal was that, you know, they are who they are without talking too much about it. If you know, sort of thing. And, you know, they are a sordid reflection of what they once were. Let's put it that way. So, yeah, I'm interested to see what they build up, who they build up, and if we can predict who that might be. Next question. I miss the drastic twists of fate that past expansions had in store for us, says the interviewer here. The deaths of the translation from German here, Whiskerfant. Whiskerfant. I'm not even going to change it to Horshafont. Whiskerfant and Papalimo, thank you Google Translate, amazing, in Heavensward are the two that spring to mind. Will we see another Scion die from the current group, or is that something you can't talk about right now? Okay, Yoshi P says, first and foremost, that's something I can't talk about, but I can't say that the possibility is no longer there. But if you say you miss the twists of fate, I can tell you that even we, the development team, cried when we were playing with Whiskerfant's death. Such a good name. And when it happened in the game and players got to experience it, there was a huge outcry in the community and even players quitting because of it. So we want to avoid the element of a beloved character's death if possible, just as a simple way to bring more drama into the expansion. Of course, a character's fate may lead to death, and we won't avoid that at all costs, but players can be assured that this is not a decision made just to build drama, end quote. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that personally on a level. I agree with the interview here and the interviewer. I think that the twists of fate that, you know, everybody, you know, Valar Morghulis, you know, all men must die, that kind of thing. It's important to have that wake-up call of people that aren't immortal in the storyline. And I think that as much as Horshafant's death was tragic, it was necessary to build that hatred, to twist the narrative. It's not always necessary, right? We can't just have characters dying all the time, because you take away any levity, any kind of any importance from that, any shock value. But the shock value, I think, is something that has been missing, at least in my opinion, for the most part. It's very an anime where nobody dies at the moment, and I think it could do with a little bit of spice in that department. Death is an important tool to end a character's journey. If you have nothing else for a character's journey planned, or perhaps you don't, you know, want to have to create a storyline for that character's journey, writers usually will kill off that character in their narrative in a book, for example, just so they don't have to tie up loose ends later. And there are several characters that have lots of loose ends that could, you know, be used to spurn in another antagonist. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think they should be ever afraid of pulling the trigger, you know, metaphorically, on a character and showing that shock value if it adds to the storyline. But at the same time, they shouldn't take it away completely out of fear of people quitting the game, because a lot of people, including myself, play for the storyline and that twisted narrative and the way that it evolves. But there we go. Next question. Will projection palettes ever work? Oh, so these are, I think the German translation to English through Google Translate doesn't really work very well here. Projection palettes, it's calling, or glamour plates, basically. So will glamour plates ever work outside of rest areas, for example, in dungeons or in the outskirts? That's a great question. Yoshi P says, it's not like we haven't thought about it before. But while a player is switching projection palettes or glamour plates, there is a short period of high load on the server due to the item IDs of the equipment. In this process, for example, items could be deleted or duplicated, since the switch happens instantly and without waiting. And then you have to take into account that the switch can be used by many players at the same time and not just by one. If the service was to be enabled in combat zones, the server would be burdened by not only item IDs, but also combat data. This could lead to errors. We already have a few ideas on how we could get around this problem, but it might take a little longer before this is possible, end quote. So I think combat areas, we're not talking about dungeons and raids here, right? Because that would just open up all sorts of problems. But I think in open combat areas, like a field instanced area, I don't know, Eastern Lenosha or something, or Summerford Farms, or whatever you might want to go to. Some places like that, like sanctuaries, would be a cool idea as well. That are outside in the open world near Aetherytes or something. Make them like specific zones, so that you're not having to do it by teleporting back to a town. You could do it at like a small Aetheryte in a zone. I think that would be a happy medium, but we'll have to see what they do. But it's cool to see that they are working on that and trying to figure out ways to make that happen, because glamour plates are amazing, but where you use them dictates, where you can use them dictates how much accessibility you have to changing depending on the situation. So next question, in Dawntrail you meet a lot of new NPCs during the Rite of Succession. Will we get more background information on them in the game? Yoshi P says yes, many characters we met in 7.0 and with whom we have connections will be provided with background information from patch 7.3 at the latest until the end of the story. We'll learn more about the lives of our allies. Awesome. I'd love to see more character development with Wooklamut's father, and I would also like to see some more storyline with Kona. Personally, I think he's a great character. So maybe more with that, and more Kryl storyline as well, right? That'd be cool. Next question. Currently, there are many hairstyles that only certain races can wear. Will there ever be hairstyles for all races? For example, Viera cannot wear a cloud hairstyle. Just before we go on to the answer for that, that is a great point. There are contest hairstyles that people work hard on creating, that get submitted, that get put in, that cannot be used on the new races. I say new races, they've been quite a while now, especially since the new female Hrofgar as well. But there's also the giveaway and sweepstake hairstyles, like the cloud hairstyle and other premium ones that you can only get from competitions. Entering those competitions or contests to win that thing and then realizing you can't use it on your character must feel pretty bad. So I agree with that question. So, editor's note, Yoshida related the question very much to the Viera and Hrofgar races, since the example was about the Viera. Okay. He says, it's not that we don't want to, but at this point in time, it's not possible. The unique elements on Viera and Hrofgar's heads forced us to adjust the display of headgear and create custom hairstyles for those races. But we still get a lot of feedback from a community that players want more options in designing their Viera or Hrofgar characters. That's why we have and will continue to work on making those races able to display more equipment and hairstyles, end quote. The key point there, more equipment, so headgear. You know, as much as anyone, lots of people are like this, including myself. We would like some equality between all of the races, and we would like to see a future where there's that eventuality where we can all wear the same pieces of gear if we wish to, and interchange between those. Now, as they've said, there are limitations due to how the heads are developed for those characters. And the real question to me is, why was it developed in such a way where they couldn't interchange these things from the start? This reminds me so heavily of a 1.0 issue where, you know, things wouldn't convert directly, so they had to rebuild them, and a lot of the coding and things like that. So I would like to see the headgear and hairstyles being included. We saw in a developer panel how the head and face morphing should be transferable between characters now. We saw that on the development panel. I think it was FanFest London. It was fascinating. There was a scene where they showed the program they use, where they were literally morphing between all of the different races with the same stuff. So they were able to, you know, better visualize and create things for a character, knowing that it's going to apply to multiple different races. But it's interesting to me that they're still releasing gear that cannot be equipped, including on the cash shop as well, that cannot be equipped by those two races. It's very strange to me. It's cutting off a section of your consumer base And I think it will negatively impact people and their choices of what they want to play in the game and how well they feel towards, obviously, the developers for that decision. But we'll have to see what they do. I mean, we're still on that fence of we would like to see, some equality between the hairstyles and headpieces, but the timeline on that, who knows, right? Who knows? But it's high on my, wish list for certain as well, and a lot of other people's. So this is a great question next. Capcom recently announced a sequel to Monster Hunter World. Are there perhaps already plans for a new crossover event with Monster Hunter? I would love to be able to hunt a Moorball in Monster Hunter Wilds or a Legiana in 14, for example. Oh my goodness, end quote. So, Legiana, wow. Oh God, would he be hearing its screams? I'd need new headphones after dealing with a Legiana in Final Fantasy XIV. That would be cool, though. And I love the Monster Hunter crossover. Yoshi P says, of course, our teams are in very good contact thanks to the existing crossover, and both sides are very happy with the result. I am very good friends with the creator of Monster Hunter, Kaname Fujioka, and the director of Monster Hunter Wilds, Yuya Tokuda. And I don't want to disturb them in their final work on Monster Hunter Wilds, because they are just as passionate about their work as I am. But when we reach a certain point in development and have discussions, there is a possibility that there will be another crossover. But it's funny that the question comes up today. Just last night I had a drink with Fujioka-san and Tokuda-san, end quote. So if you think if anybody ever thinks that they're not going to do another one of these, then they're crazy at this point, because it was such a successful crossover. It is a perfect match made in heaven. The Monster Hunter Wilds crossover, I have no idea what they could do, but for Worlds with a crossover with the behemoth in Monster Hunter, I don't know if any of you have played Monster Hunter World, but if you have, it is fascinating how they managed to translate so much of behemoth's DNA from Final Fantasy XIV into Monster Hunter, and it's terrifying. It's quite a difficult fight. It is one of the more difficult fights that I've done in Monster Hunter World. I have killed it, and I've got the actual armor from it as well, but it took a lot of time for me to do that on its highest difficulty. In the Final Fantasy XIV side, we had obviously the normal mode, and we had the extreme version of Rathalos, which probably was my favorite 4-player content they've ever put in the game. It was fascinating. I would like to see it even dialed up even further. Maybe they could do something much bigger. Maybe like an 8-player trial or something would be amazing. But the 4-player stuff worked really well, and it captured that Monster Hunter vibe with the limited number of carts, right, per battle, so you can't just death roll into it. You have to learn the mechanics. The separate healing mechanic with the potions rather than having access to, actually healing yourself. It was fun, a lot of fun, and I would love to see. What would I want in terms of a monster? I don't think Legiana. I'd probably go for something more, I don't know, what would I go for? I loved Rathalos. That'd be a tough one. Maybe something like Gen Moran. Something so big and crazy that you could do the firing the cannons at it, that sort of thing. Because if you wanted to capture Monster Hunter, it's not just slaying monsters, it's also the interactive battles as well, like, not Zoro Magdaros, but like Gen Moran firing the harpoons and that stuff, and then reloading and then avoiding mechanics, and then jumping on top of the giant monster, running up and then like attacking sections of it. Oh man, if they did something like that, I would be the happiest ever. But yeah, I love Monster Hunter. I want more crossover stuff. So next we've got a big question. It says, the Arcadian Light Heavyweight is the first part of Dawntrail's new raid series. In previous presentations, you said that the new end content would be more in line with the difficulty level of Heavensward and Stormblood. Now, more players than ever have completed the new raid in week 1. Not immediately true. And the difficulty level seems to have continued to drop. Okay. Was that just because this was the beginning of a raid series, or did you expect less from the players? Oh my goodness. I think that's a translation error. It sounds a lot harsher than it should. But let's have a look. Yoshi P says, when you look at the difficulty of the fights, there are two variables. First, there are the mechanics that players have to play and stay alive. And second, there is the DPS, which is based on the individual attack values of the classes. Looking at the first part, the mechanics, I think we had some unique attack patterns this time that weren't too easy to complete. But since it was the first raid tier in Dawntrail, we didn't want to make it too difficult. This is something they always do. It's never the most difficult, the first one. It should be accessible and doable for as many players as possible, so that they have the motivation to want to play the future raid tiers. Now let's look at the second variable, DPS. When we developed the raid, we used the attack values of the 7.0 classes and their balance as a model for the incoming damage. With the release of 7.0, however, it became apparent the DPS of a new Pictomancer job clearly stood out from the other classes. We could have nerfed the Pictomancer before the raid, but since many people liked playing them so much, we decided to bring the DPS of the other classes into line with that of the Pictomancer. So with 7.05, we increased the attack values of the other classes. At the same time, however, we also released the Savage Raid with the required DPS calculations based on the damage of the 7.0 classes. Since all classes now did more damage than originally calculated, the raid naturally became easier. Unfortunately, adjusting the DPS to the classes took so much time that we were no longer able to make adjustments to the raid. We didn't want to rush into increasing the stats required to complete the raid, as it could have made the raid impossible to complete. So we decided to leave it as it was, and accepted that even if 2 to 3 players died during the mechanics, the raid could still be completed if everyone did their best. This, of course, leads to the people saying that the raid is too easy. To summarize, we don't intentionally make the raid so easy or think the players' skills were too low. We wanted the job adjustments to be received positively and not to dampen the players' fun with nerfs. This meant that many players were able to experience the sense of achievement of completing the raid. Word got around, of course, and many more players than usual have now entered this raid tier, which we see as a positive development. But of course, there are many players who would have liked a more exciting race for the world first kill or a difficult raid. I've heard that they are disappointed, and at the moment I'm developing the raid for 7.2, which will have more unique and difficult elements for these players. There will also be an ultimate raid which will be released in 7.1. This will be difficult again, so prepare yourself well, end quote. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't necessarily think that that Yoshi P and the team had any intentions of going, oh, the player base needs more accessibility, we need to, you know, dumb this down, or any words like that. I don't think that ever came into the picture at all. Personally, I find that hard to believe that they would do that based on the success of previous raid tiers and the difficulty that people expect. I think it is true that it is a better experience to instead of nerfing one job immediately, to bring the others up to it in terms of potency. I think that's a really good decision, and I'd like to see that more in more online and even single player games, where something is OP. It's like, oh no, it's too OP. Well, okay, we'll make the boss values slightly higher, or whatever you want to do with that, and bring up the DPS of everyone else. If one is an outlier, is like, you know, several thousands of DPS higher than the rest, bring those up to match it, or put into priority of where that should be. Is it a selfish DPS that doesn't have any support for the team? Well, they should have naturally more DPS than a person who has a res, for example. That's how it should be, at least in my opinion, because you know, you're basically sacrificing things for other support use in different situations. The worst thing that you could possibly do in this game is bring everyone to exactly the same situation, because then you end up with a boring game with jobs that feel the same between them. At least in my opinion and experience with World of Warcraft in the past, when there's homogenization, when things are brought too close together, it becomes quite boring, the combat side of things, and then you're just, you know, doing boss mechanics, and then as a result of that, they have to make boss mechanics more difficult or more advanced, and crazy things have to happen, and crazy checks where you're playing like the perfect 1% rotation to actually clear a fight. I find that less interesting than just having that balance inequality in places and then just flipping that around between expansions as they have done in the past, where things are great at that time and they're a little bit weak at that time. Now, there are obviously outliers where people are very far behind in DPS for no particular reason, or people that, like jobs, for example, like Black Mage, perhaps it was underperforming or whatever. I mean, it isn't at the moment. People who say it isn't, they're not quite playing it, I don't think, but or at least statistically it's not the lowest, as from what I know anyway. But yeah, I think it's all about bringing people in line, but not so much so that one is greater than the other by a massive amount, but also not so much where everybody is literally doing the same amount of DPS regardless, because that would just be boring. But yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the next part of the Arcadian. The first part was amazing. I loved the character development of all of the fighters that we fought against. I thought the idea of an arena style, battler was fun. It's great. I loved it. And the music was fantastic. And I love the announcer as well. That's something that I'm going to miss in future expansions when we don't have that. Just hearing that guy commentate every time somebody dies on my team is the best feeling ever. And yeah, and like they say, they've got plenty of difficulty with the ultimate content. And I presume there'll be like a Criterion Savage again. So, there's plenty of content on the way for difficulty. But yeah, the Savage Mode stuff's great fun if you've not done it. It's great fun. Next question, and the last one. Currently, a transfer to another world in the data center is only possible from the Aetherytes of the city-states Uldar, Gridania, and Limsa Lominsa. Will it be possible to make the journey from the expansion cities in the future? Oh, that's an interesting one. Yoshi says that wouldn't be difficult to implement, but when it comes to traveling between worlds, we want it to be as fast as possible. And the more Aetherytes you can travel from, the slower the service will run. That's why we initially planned to make it possible from just one location. But in the end, we chose 3 starting cities to give all players who start the game a new opportunity to travel between the worlds straight away. Yeah, end quote. So that's a good point. Obviously, the more queues that you make, so it must queue from each individual Aetherite. That's interesting. I wonder if there's any favoritism between certain Aetherites, or if a certain Aetherite gets more load. Does Limsa Lominsa get more load than New Gridania, I wonder? Like, would you, if you queued at the same time as another person, one of you was in Limsa Lominsa trying to get to, I don't know, another server, the same server from the other guy but stood in New Gridania, would one of you get in sooner than the other, depending on which Aetherite you chose because of how the queuing works? Or is it just because it has to calculate all of that load together? That's an interesting question. That might be like a Mythbusters thing. We'll have to test that. But yeah, I think it would be cool to teleport from more areas personally as well. But I mean, there's no reason not to just go to a starting city state. I mean, the only time I really jump over is to go see friends. That's one option. Check market boards for like new items and buy them if I can. And then 3 would be hunt trains. And I think the third one is the one that gets the most use. So maybe making the queues bigger would be a bad thing in that regard. If it does have such a significant impact, then just sticking with the 3 we've got would probably be the best, but who knows? Anyway, these are some great questions. Obviously, thank you so much to Crystal Universe for actually doing this interview and asking some interesting questions. I think there wasn't a lot of people from Gamescom that actually asked about the Viera and Hrothgar issue, so thank you so much for that on behalf of all the Viera and Hrothgar players. And yeah, Monster Hunter, super excited, dude. Like, I would love to see a follow-up to that fantastic collab. So anyway, link in the description. Go check out Crystal Universe. Give this article some love. If you would, share it with your friends and all of that good stuff. But yeah, I'm super hyped about the next raid tier, dude. I can't wait to see what character designs we have, and hopefully they don't drop the ball and continue that great flow of what the characters feel, look like, and the mechanics. Oh man, I can't wait to see what they come up with next. M4S is nuts. If you haven't played that yet, we've started progging that recently. It's amazing. I love it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.